And welcome to The Issue Is. Congresswoman Barbara Lee is here on set with us after a big week in Washington, a big vote in Washington, a bipartisan majority passing that deal that was negotiated by the Democratic President, Joe Biden, and the Republican Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. I want to show you some video of this. The bill allowing America to pay its bills and avoid a catastrophic default. It also raises work requirements for Americans on federal food aid and restarts student loan repayments. Congresswoman Barbara Lee from Oakland, one of 46 Democrats in the House to vote against it. She's here on The Issue Is. Welcome back. Good to see you.
Glad to be back.
So the president wanted people to vote for this. The Democratic leader wanted people to vote for this. Why'd you vote against it?
Well, first, let me just say this was a manufactured crisis, first of all, with the MAGA extremist Republicans. And I believe that they actually wanted the country to go into default. Those of us who voted against it never would allow the country to go into default. We actually, way back last year, wanted to do the debt ceiling vote then. We also had a discharge petition. Of course, all Democrats signed that. And we also talked about the 14th Amendment. And so we've been pushing hard not to default. And so when we looked at the deal, and I have to tell you, the president did a phenomenal job. It was lose-lose, really, with Kevin McCarthy and the MAGA Republicans really wanting to go into default, that I decided when I saw that the work requirements were going to be disproportionately impacting black and brown women with children. Students now are going to have to repay these loans. I mean, there were some provisions in there, and as an appropriator, looking at it and how much our discretionary domestic spending is going to go down $1 billion, I had to represent my constituents and the 20 million people here in California who are one paycheck away from poverty.
So when you say you weren't going to let there be a default, if this came down to just you, because there was enough votes where there was a margin here, if this came down to just you and it was vote for this or have a default, would you have voted differently?
Well, let me tell you, we all talked, and we knew that it wasn't going to come to that. We knew that Kevin McCarthy, he was supposed to put up, and he almost put up, 150 votes, even though Democrats put up more votes than he did. And so we knew from day one how many votes there were. And so we decided there's some of us who are going to take on these MAGA extreme Republicans and McCarthy and really wanted to make sure that the public understood. There's some of us representing those who are one paycheck away from poverty.
So you were able to vote for this because you didn't have to worry about the default.
We knew there was not going to be a default once we counted the votes.
So we know the votes on this were different among the candidates for Senate. You voted against this. Katie Porter voted against this. Adam Schiff voted for it. He wanted to put up a tweet where he explained his rationale. He said this: "Today I voted to stand with Californians and stop a disastrous default, a default that would have killed jobs and skyrocketed unemployment. This bill was far from perfect, but President Biden negotiated an end to McCarthy's hostage-taking. I will always do what's best for California families." Why is he wrong, and what does this whole episode tell us about how you would be different as a senator?
First, he's not wrong. That's what would have happened. We all said that. I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and so I have to look out for budget cuts. I have to look out for those who are living on the edge. I have to look out for people who need their government to work for them. And in fact, I believe for myself that this was the right vote, because we have to take on these MAGA extremist Republicans. That was their bill. The president did the best he could, and he did do a good job. But we started with a clean debt ceiling. Tell me, when have we had a budget negotiation, an appropriations negotiation connected with the debt ceiling vote? We lifted it 3 times under Donald Trump. And so, no, we knew it was going to pass, and we understand and clearly understand, tried to avoid a default even last year.
But if he were to say, you know, this is the sort of responsible adult thing would be to vote for this and back the president, you say what?
I say the responsible adult thing was to recognize that no one was going to allow this country to go into default. And there's some of us who have to stand up to these MAGA extremist Republicans, and some of us who have to look out for those 20 million people who are one paycheck away from poverty in California.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of those people, because you're pushing legislation in the House right now called the Deposit Act. We want to put this up on the screen so people can look at the bill. Essentially, what this does is it allows for low-income people to get federal help with a security deposit. And this is for a lot of people that may be, as you mentioned, one paycheck away from potentially being homeless. How would this work, and do you have the votes to pass it?
Well, first, let me say, being here in Los Angeles is really exciting for me, and Mayor Bass is doing a phenomenal job with her housing policies, and it's tough, but she's doing a really phenomenal job, and I'm really looking at how she's doing this as it relates to housing. And yes, so many people need that money, $5,000, $6,000 for a deposit so that they can have a decent place to live. That's part of what an affordable housing strategy is about. And we need HUD, our Department of Housing and Urban Development, to invest in deposits assistance for people so that they don't live on the streets. That's a way to keep people or to provide affordable housing. It's a strategy, and we're working hard to get that passed. Of course, we know we're in the minority, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to work with Republicans. I have many Republicans I'm working with on repealing the authorization to use military force, where I was the only one who voted against it.
Right.
And so I have to have hope, and I'm going to continue with it. And when I get in the Senate, if it doesn't pass by then, I'll keep it up in the Senate.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Senate race itself. We have some images of you out on the campaign trail recently interacting with Adam Schiff. You met him at the California convention, the Democratic convention. You did an event with Katie Porter and Adam Schiff. What do you guys say to each other behind the scenes? What's your dynamic like?
Well, we work together. We're colleagues. But we're different. You know, I have a lens that they don't have. They have lenses that I don't have. And I want to be in the Senate because it's certainly lacking diversity, first of all. There's no candidate in the race who looks like me and who's had the experience that I have had. Since 1789, there have been only 2 black women serving in the Senate, Senator Carol Moseley Braun and our Vice President. A total of 10 years since 1789. And so what I bring to the Senate is more diversity, more equity, more inclusion, and a new perspective that needs to be part of representation.
Well, right now, every California statewide official that has endorsed anyone has endorsed you. We've got some images of the people that have endorsed you so far in this race. You've done very well with some high-profile endorsements, but you are still trailing in fundraising and name ID and polling. A lot of people don't know your story yet, which is why it's good you're coming on a show like this. But where do you see the state of your campaign, especially coming off the California Democratic Convention last week, and in terms of the strategy going forward?
Well, when you look at the polling, what takes place, though, is once people get to know me, know my story, my experience, and what I have done to make life better based on many of my lived experiences, it's neck and neck. And so what we have to do is communicate to people how effective I've been, and I have a lot of courage and conviction, and I'll stand my ground. And as an independent, if I need to, taking on both parties. And so last week at the convention, it was really exciting. I mean, I've been part of this Democratic Party forever. I helped form the Progressive Caucus, the Peace Caucus, the Poverty Caucus. I'm a member of the DNC. I was on the drafting committee for the platform for two presidential elections. And so the Democratic Party activists know me, and they know who I am, and they know that my experience and my background is a standard that I'm going to continue with in the Senate.
I mean, does it feel a little bit like your life's work all coming together, walking through those halls and seeing all those faces?
It was really wonderful to see so many, and so many people, so much diversity, so many people who heretofore had not been part of our Democratic Party, and to see everyone, of course, after COVID, to see everyone together, it was remarkable. It really told me why I have to win this race, because a lot of these people haven't been seen before. A lot of people at the grassroots level work so hard to elect Democrats, but then Democrats are elected and they move forward.
Yeah.
And so I want them to know that I'm there, have been there for them, and will be there for them.
We've done something with both of your colleagues in the Senate race called the 4 questions. We're going to do with you now. This is a rapid fire, first thing that comes to your mind about the Senate job, okay? What do you think is the biggest issue domestically?
Ending the filibuster.
What is the biggest issue internationally?
Global peace and security and our national security strategy.
What is the Senate committee you would most like to serve on?
Appropriations.
And who is the modern senator that you respect the most?
I am not going to answer that question.
Okay, we respect that. I guess it's plead the fifth, so we just got to plead the fifth on this, the Andy Cohen game. Well, we know that you could potentially be serving with other black women in the Senate. This year is an exciting year. We've got some images of this, there's 4 different women, including you, that are now serious contenders around the country as potential black female senators. As we know right now, there are none. Are you all sort of communicating with each other? Is this a sisterhood amongst yourselves?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
One is not enough.
Yeah.
One is not enough. Since 1789, only 2. We have a long way to go. But 4 of us are working together, and we're going to make sure each and every one of us are elected.
What's the difference of having a black woman in there?
Our experiences are different. First of all, when you look at us as Democrats, we've been the heart and soul and the backbone of the Democratic Party. We work hard to get Democrats elected. But we haven't had necessarily a seat at the table in the Senate except for a total of 10 years.
Yeah.
Secondly, we have lived experiences where our understanding of intersectionality, how poverty intersects with the lack of housing, affordable housing, and health care. And we want everyone to have a seat at the table. I've worked to make sure that there's equality with the LGBTQ plus community, with the disability community, our seniors, our young people, communities of color, African American, everybody. And so black women bring a perspective of fighting for everyone to make this country better. It's about strengthening this country.
One of the issues that California is debating right now is the issue of reparations. There is a push by some that there should be cash payments made to black Californians. There are others who say that's not fair because the Californians who were involved with slavery haven't been around for generations. What say you?
Well, first, let me applaud Governor Newsom for signing the bill, setting up the task force, and our Secretary of State, Shirley Weber, for her leadership on this. Secondly, reparations is an international concept, first of all. When there are crimes against humanity, slavery, when generations of people have been affected, not by individuals, but government policies, mind you, and the enslavement of African Americans Africans for 250 years in this country, then racism, Jim Crow, Reconstruction. There's generational trauma, first of all. Secondly, the wealth gap, the economic gap, the healthcare disparities, the mass incarceration rates. When you look at the disparities, reparations is an international concept which needs to be applied here. We supported the reparations for Japanese Americans, for so many groups that have been discriminated against and held enslaved and brutalized in this country. You've got to repair the damage. And finally, I'll just say I have my own bill that's calling for a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission. The transformation is reparations. But in this country, we have to have a truth-telling moment. People don't understand what the government-sanctioned institution of slavery has done and why we see police misconduct, why we see disproportionate rates of black people dying from COVID. There's a connection, and this truth-telling moment will help heal and bring people to the point where they say, yes, we've got to repair this damage so that no more generations of African Americans have to suffer like we have suffered. And it's not about individual payments, it's about the government-sanctioned institution repairing the damage.
So does that mean not necessarily cash payments?
It means whatever, like H.R. 40, it's a commission to study. And I think that our task force in California, they'll come up with whatever recommendations are important, and then we'll take it from there.
We want to get to know you a little bit more. So we know it was recently Memorial Day, and you celebrated your father with a great picture of him and his service, and also have recently celebrated your mother. There's a nice picture of you and your mom. What's the most important lesson you learned from your parents?
My mother told me as a child, born and raised in El Paso, Texas. Of course, I told you my story about coming to Southern Cal, San Fernando Junior High and San Fernando High School. First black cheerleader there. Can't is not in the dictionary. So regardless of the barriers and the challenges, understand that you've got to dismantle those, break them up, and move forward. And do it not just for yourself, but for everyone. My dad served in World War II and in Korea. And I always remember him in his uniform. Proud black man, served in the 92nd Battalion in Italy, supporting the Normandy invasion, saying he wanted to buy a house in San Leandro, California, where coming from Southern California to visit my family aunts in Northern California, you have to drive around San Leandro because they burn crosses. It was that racist. Okay? My dad said, I want to buy a house there. They ran him out of town. Today, I represent San Leandro. Okay, and tells me, and my dad said, you've got to keep hope, you've got to keep fighting, you've got to keep demanding. And, you know, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And they were both, in their own way, fighting for their children to have the opportunities that every child deserved in this country, but also saying it's not for you guys only, it's for everybody who are facing these challenges.
What do you think they would think of you running for the Senate, or the possibility of you taking that oath?
Well, I hear my mother, she passed away 8 years ago. I hear her telling me, stay strong, don't get angry, stay focused. And remember, I said the can't is not in the dictionary. And my dad would say to me, don't let them send our troops into harm's way. He was the first one that called me after I was the only one who voted against the authorization to use force after the horrific events of 9/11. He called me and he said, that's the right vote. Military officer, proud lieutenant colonel, retired. He said, yes, he said, I'm a veteran, I'm a military man, but in 3 days after this attack, you've got to make sure you're strategic, you make sure the response is rational. Don't you give authority to away to any president until you know what you're doing. So he was the first one who called me, so he'd be very proud and guiding me through this madness right now in this country.
What a story, their story, and what a story, your story as well. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, always a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks so much for coming in. And you know we like to end with music. Before we have Tommy Lahren and Ethan Bierman up next, we're going to end with your favorite artist.
Oh, Beyonce.
Beyonce. And you know, we're playing her song, Break My Soul, because we know you can't break her soul, we can't break your soul.
Oh, no. No. Oh, no.
There's no breaking your soul.
No.
So, Queen Bee, take it away.